Hi, Jason Sulliman here. Wanted to make another video on articulation, but using the concepts of dynamic harmonic fluency. And I wanted to talk about classical harmonic fluency as well as contemporary harmonic fluency. And I view those two as equally important, especially for this instrument, because a lot of the repertoire we play is in fact contemporary. But it's important to make sure that we're kind of getting dynamic in our harmonic fluency as well. So in previous videos, I've talked a lot about a 1 chord and a 5/7 chord, and how it's a really great chord progression, and a lot of music that we do is based on that, especially in Western tonal music. And I use the example of taking a B-flat arpeggio, just like 1 octave, and then playing down the dominant 7 arpeggio, or playing up and down the B-flat arpeggio, and then playing up and down the dominant 7 arpeggio. Depending on the note you start on, that's going to change the notes that you would most likely lead to, and that changes the order of notes that you would hit in the dominant 7th chord. Same thing can be applied to an articulation exercise, and what I like to do is go up the dominant and down, up the tonic and down the dominant 7th chord. So a single octave up the B flat arpeggio, and then down would be the dominant 7. And so it might sound something like this. As you can tell, I'm already on my wobble board, and I'm going to turn on my smart metronome. So 1 octave articulated would be like this. And then you can work that all over the range of the instrument. But what you can do to add some challenge to that is if you take more than just those 4 notes and you actually do a 5 note or a 6 note or a 7 note or an 8 note arpeggio, and then you go down the dominant 7. Every time you add another note, you do a couple of things. Number one, you increase the range that you're articulating across, which is really helpful, because I find that if you have a lot of shifting or a lot of weirdness that happens from like low notes to high notes, or high notes to low notes, your articulation really is going to have to get worked out. And I have some videos on stability to try to minimize the amount of shift and weirdness that happens. But we all do it to even some micro extent. So to be able to articulate across the ranges is really important. So, for example, let's take an 8-note arpeggio where we're going to go 8 notes, which is just a little bit more than 2 octaves, and then we're going to come down the dominant 7th, just as an example of a way that you can develop some fluency with this. So my metronome's at 100. I think it's a really nice 8th-note pulse for starters. It's too fast to think about the notes, and so you have to work out the patterns, and I think that that's important. So 8-note. And I like to swing down to the 7th and then come back up. The 7th of the tonic, that is, so the A, coming back up to B flat. And you can do that all over the range of the instrument. And you really have to have a fair amount of harmonic fluency in order to be able to do that, but you also need to have a fair control of clarity and articulation as you progress up and down through the range. So I highly recommend taking that as an exercise to do. Just take that 1-5-7-1 arpeggio, if you will, the dynamic harmonic progression of 1-5-7-1. And practice that and add notes as you get more and more comfortable, more and more capable. I do a lot of 8 and 9 notes now, and it gets a little tricky from time to time. So the other thing you could do is, I like to call it a contemporary harmonic fluency, and that's where I take straight interval patterns and I just practice straight up and down the intervals. Now this is good for a number of reasons. Number one, a lot of these patterns are things we're going to see in music. For example, major seconds, that's going to be whole tone scales, and you're going to see whole tone in a lot of music, especially expressionism and a lot of contemporary music. Minor thirds, that's going to be a lot of diminished arpeggios. It's just stacked minor thirds. So you're going to see that in all of the 7/5 cadenzas of the prior solos. You're going to see it all over the place. Major thirds, those are augmented arpeggios, and so those will come up into the repertoire as well. Perfect fourths, you're going to see that a lot in Hindemith, then you get tritones, perfect fifths. These are intervals you're going to see. So I think we should absolutely be practicing just articulating up and down these intervals. First, we have to know our way around this instrument in a contemporary context. But second, you're articulating over a wider and wider range. So an example of, let's say, minor thirds. Let's say I do 5 minor thirds, which would create an octave's worth. And you get a diminished arpeggio of an octave, right? Etc., etc. And then you can do many, many notes. That was 5 notes. So let's do 6 notes, 7 note, 8 note, 9 note. Let's do 2 octaves worth. Etc., etc., etc. So by doing different intervals, you're going to be acclimating to different contemporary patterns, which are all, I think, really helpful, right? So major thirds, that's an augmented arpeggio. If you were to do 4 notes of a major third pattern, you're actually going to get above the octave. Sorry, 5 notes will get you 1 above the octave, right? So if we do a 5-note major third pattern. Etc., etc. And again, you can keep adding notes, and every time you add another note, you're increasing the range that you're going to be doing in a single rep. And then when you go up by half steps or down by half steps or bop around the horn, you really have to know your way around the instrument. Let's see, that's major thirds. Let's do fourths. Fourths are a lot of fun. So if I start on B flat and E flat and A flat and D flat, and let's do 5 perfect fourths and see how that goes. And the great news is I don't care how good you are, if there's a moment where your focus isn't exactly where it needs to be, you're going to flub the notes. You're going to get a little bit off track. So you really have to be engaged in a very specific way. And I think it's good to develop a habit of being engaged in that way. Good. We can do tritones. It's not in my ear. Hold on. Okay. Wow, that one's tricky. And so as the interval between each note gets larger, it gets a little dicier, and you have to really be, everything needs to be firing just as it's supposed to be. And then obviously the 5 notes gives us 2 octaves. like perfect fifths. We'll do that one again. And so you can keep going, keep going, keep going. What I tend to do is I pick one interval every day, and I'll spend about 5 minutes just playing through that interval. I do everything from major seconds, minor thirds, perfect fourths, segmented fourths, perfect sixths, minor sixths, major sevenths, major sevenths, perfect octaves, and then I'll do minor ninths. So I pick one of those each day, and then when I get all the way to minor ninths, the next day I go back to major seconds. And so it's just kind of on this rotation. It takes about 5 minutes a day. And then I'll do about 5 minutes a day where I take one of the classical harmonic fluency, dynamic harmonic whatever we want to call it, but I'll take the 1-5-1 chords and I'll arpeggiate my way up and down those. And when I get to the point where 8 notes sounds pretty good, I'll go to 9 notes. 9 notes will kick my butt. I'll do that till it sounds good, then I'll go to 10 notes. I mean, it's just you're constantly riding the line between I can be successful at this, and if I'm a little out of focus, or if my chops are a little off, or if my brain's a little off, it's going to just implode. I'm a big believer that we want feedback very quickly. It makes it very efficient in terms of the way that we practice. I don't want to play something where I can mentally check out or physically be checked out, and I can go several minutes before I even realize this is kind of mediocre playing. I want something that if I'm not firing on all cylinders, it sounds like crud right away. So I immediately know, and I can stop, and I can check myself, and I can fix what's going on. That's the kind of way I like to practice. And these patterns not only help us with basic technical elements of playing, but they keep our brain engaged in a way that will directly transfer to the challenges of the repertoire that we face. I cannot stress this enough. For those of you that are out there studying the instrument seriously and practicing seriously, you're not going to find a lot of this in the traditional pedagogical method books, but please give it a try. I think you will find it to be a great challenge at first, and you might find that to be frustrating, but sometimes that means you're doing it right. All right? So give it a whirl. Let me know what you think. Thanks. Happy practicing.